Captain Kenji Yamamoto crouched behind the twisted remains of a destroyed Type 95 Ha-Go tank on the muddy slopes of Bougainville Island. The date was November 8, 1943, and what he had just witnessed defied every tactical principle drilled into him at the Imperial Army Tank School in Chiba. A single American infantryman, positioned barely 40 meters away, had destroyed his entire platoon of 3 tanks in less than 90 seconds. Not with artillery, not with anti-tank guns requiring crews of 6 men and weighing over a ton, but with a tube he carried on his shoulder, something the Americans were casually calling a bazooka. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Captain Yamamoto's hands trembled as he recorded the encounter in his field journal that evening. The words he wrote would later be discovered among captured documents, offering a rare glimpse into the psychological shock of encountering American technological superiority. One man destroyed what took our nation's factories 6 months to produce. He fired from a standing position, moved to new cover, and fired again before our crews could even traverse their turrets. Then he simply walked away, reloading as casually as a hunter with a shotgun. If one soldier possesses such power, how can our armor possibly advance? The weapon that so thoroughly unnerved Captain Yamamoto represented a revolution in infantry anti-tank warfare, one that Imperial Japanese strategists had failed to anticipate or counter. The M1A1 Bazooka, officially designated as the rocket launcher M1, had entered American service in 1942, and by late 1943, it had become standard equipment for American infantry units throughout the Pacific Theater. Japanese military intelligence had received reports of this weapon from as early as the North African campaign, but the reports were dismissed as exaggerated or misunderstood. Japanese doctrine held that effective anti-tank warfare required either dedicated anti-tank guns or coordinated infantry assault with magnetic mines and satchel charges, tactics that demanded close approach and often resulted in suicidal casualties. The notion that a single infantryman could reliably destroy armored vehicles from a safe distance using a man-portable weapon seemed implausible to Japanese military theorists. Staff officers in Tokyo reviewed intelligence reports describing the bazooka with skepticism, noting that such a weapon would require rocket propulsion technology beyond what they believed American industry capable of producing in meaningful quantities. These same officers had convinced themselves that American combat effectiveness stemmed primarily from material abundance rather than technical innovation, a comfortable fiction that allowed them to maintain confidence in Japanese tactical superiority despite mounting evidence to the contrary. Lieutenant Hiroshi Tanaka, a tank commander with the 8th Tank Regiment, embodied this institutional confidence. Trained in the proud tradition of Japanese armored warfare, Lieutenant Tanaka had studied the tank battles of Khalkhin Gol against Soviet forces and believed armor superiority came from aggressive tactics and warrior spirit rather than mere mechanical specifications. His Type 97 Chi-Ha medium tank, while thinly armored by European standards, had proven effective in Manchuria and China against opponents lacking modern anti-tank capabilities. When his regiment received deployment orders to New Guinea in early 1944, Lieutenant Tanaka anticipated another series of decisive engagements where Japanese tactical prowess would overcome American material advantages. His confidence lasted exactly 4 days into the campaign. On January 14, 1944, during a probing attack near Finschhafen, Lieutenant Tanaka's tank platoon encountered American positions defended by elements of the 32nd Infantry Division. The engagement began conventionally enough, with American small arms fire bouncing harmlessly off the Chi-Ha's armor plating. Then came a sound Lieutenant Tanaka would describe in his diary as resembling a rushing wind followed by a crack like thunder. The lead tank in his formation, commanded by his friend Lieutenant Sato, simply exploded. The turret separated from the hull in a geyser of flame and black smoke, landing 15 feet from the burning chassis. Before Lieutenant Tanaka could process what had occurred, a second rocket struck his own tank's frontal armor. The shaped charge warhead, designed specifically to defeat armored protection, punched through the 25mm steel plate as if it were paper. The penetration created a jet of superheated metal fragments that killed his driver instantly and set fire to ammunition stored in the hull. Lieutenant Tanaka managed to escape through the turret hatch, his uniform smoldering, his face badly burned. As he stumbled away from his dying vehicle, he caught sight of the weapon that had defeated him. An American soldier, appearing no older than 20, stood in a fighting position with a 5-foot tube resting on his shoulder. The soldier calmly loaded another rocket from the rear of the tube, brought the weapon to bear on the third tank, and fired. That tank, too, erupted in flames. Lieutenant Tanaka wrote in his diary that night from a field hospital, his hands bandaged from burns suffered in the escape. We have trained to fear anti-tank guns, to respect artillery, to move quickly through positions where these weapons might be emplaced. But how do we counter a weapon that appears to be everywhere, carried by common infantry, capable of destroying our finest armor with a single shot? This changes everything we know about armored warfare. If every American squad possesses such capability, our tanks become nothing more than steel coffins carrying their crews to certain death. The psychological impact of the bazooka on Japanese armored forces cannot be overstated. Tank crews who had previously advanced with confidence now hesitated, knowing that death could come from any concealed position, fired by a single enemy soldier who might be impossible to spot before he fired. This hesitation proved tactically catastrophic, as the fundamental purpose of armor is to provide mobile protected firepower that can break through defensive positions. When tanks slow down or stop, they become vulnerable to all forms of anti-tank weapons. The bazooka thus achieved a psychological effect far beyond its direct destructive capability. It transformed the entire tactical calculus of armored operations. Major Takeshi Watanabe, an intelligence officer attached to the 14th Army headquarters in the Philippines, attempted to understand this new weapon through systematic analysis of battlefield reports and captured equipment. In March 1944, his unit recovered an intact M1A1 bazooka from a captured American position near Ormoc Bay. Major Watanabe supervised a detailed examination of the weapon, photographing every component and measuring every dimension. What he discovered both impressed and disturbed him. The bazooka was mechanically simple, consisting of a steel tube, a basic electrical firing mechanism powered by dry cell batteries, simple iron sights, and a shoulder rest. The rocket itself was similarly straightforward in design, with a shaped charge warhead, a solid propellant motor, and stabilizing fins. Major Watanabe's report to headquarters emphasized the elegance of the weapon's design. The Americans have achieved something remarkable. They have created a weapon of devastating effectiveness using principles and materials well within our industrial capacity to replicate. The bazooka requires no exotic alloys, no precision machining beyond our capabilities, no secret formulas. Yet we have nothing equivalent in our arsenal. The shaped charge principle has been understood since the 1930s. The rocket propulsion is unsophisticated by comparison to our naval torpedo technology. The electrical firing system is simpler than a field telephone. Any competent engineer could replicate this weapon given 3 months and adequate resources. So why do we send our infantry against enemy armor with magnetic mines and bamboo spears while every American infantry squad possesses this portable artillery? The answer to Major Watanabe's question revealed uncomfortable truths about Japanese military-industrial priorities. Japanese weapons development had focused heavily on offensive systems intended to support a war of rapid conquest. Resources went to aircraft, naval vessels, and artillery that could project power across the vast distances of the Pacific. Defensive infantry weapons received lower priority, under the assumption that Japanese forces would maintain offensive momentum and that warrior spirit would overcome any temporary disadvantages in equipment. The idea of equipping infantry with expensive rocket-propelled anti-tank weapons seemed wasteful when those same resources could produce more tanks or aircraft. Furthermore, Japanese military culture emphasized collective tactics over individual capability. The notion of empowering a single soldier with such destructive potential contradicted hierarchical principles that concentrated special weapons in the hands of dedicated specialists under officer control. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. A bazooka operator required minimal training, could act independently, and wielded firepower previously associated with much larger military units. This democratization of destructive capability, so natural to American military culture, seemed almost philosophically wrong to Japanese military theorists who believed proper warfare required discipline, coordination, and obedience to centralized command. Sergeant Yoshio Matsuda encountered the bazooka from a different perspective than tank crews or intelligence officers. As an infantry squad leader fighting on Bougainville Island in September 1944, Sergeant Matsuda commanded a defensive position overlooking one of the island's vital supply routes. His orders were straightforward: hold the position at all costs, slow American advance, inflict maximum casualties. His squad had prepared carefully, digging interconnected fighting positions with good fields of fire, camouflaging their positions with coral fragments and vegetation, stockpiling ammunition and grenades. They were ready for the American assault they knew would come. When the attack began on September 17th, Sergeant Matsuda's squad initially performed well, their disciplined rifle fire forcing American infantry to take cover and slowing their advance. Then came the bazookas. Sergeant Matsuda watched in horrified fascination as American soldiers moved forward in coordinated pairs, one man providing covering fire while his partner advanced carrying the distinctive tube. These bazooka teams targeted not tanks, for there were no Japanese tanks on Bougainville, but the coral and concrete fortifications that protected Japanese positions. The shaped charge warheads proved devastatingly effective against these fixed defenses. A position that might withstand hours of small arms fire and survive multiple artillery near misses could be destroyed by a single well-placed bazooka round. Sergeant Matsuda recorded his observations in a letter to his brother, a letter that was never sent but was later found among his personal effects after he was killed in action. They use this tank-killing weapon against our bunkers and pillboxes as casually as we might use a rifle grenade. The concrete we spent weeks pouring, the coral we excavated with hand tools, the positions we believed could withstand anything short of a direct naval gun hit, all of it means nothing against their portable rockets. Each position becomes a track for its defenders. We cannot abandon the position without being shot by their riflemen, but if we stay, their bazooka teams will reduce our cover to rubble and kill us all. There is no good answer to this tactical problem. They have created a weapon that negates our prepared defenses while requiring nothing more than 2 men and a simple tube. The versatility of the bazooka astonished Japanese forces perhaps more than its raw destructive power. American troops employed the weapon in roles far beyond its original anti-tank design. Against Japanese fortifications, the bazooka provided infantry squads with immediate indirect fire capability, allowing them to suppress or destroy strongpoints without waiting for artillery or air support. Against Japanese infantry attacks, particularly the dreaded nighttime banzai charges, bazooka teams could deliver devastating fragmentation effects by airburst rounds above attacking formations. Against supply targets, ammunition dumps, and command posts, the weapon's portability allowed small raiding parties to strike deep behind Japanese lines with firepower previously requiring much larger forces. This tactical flexibility stemmed partly from American military culture that encouraged initiative and improvisation at lower command levels, but it also reflected the bazooka's fundamental design philosophy. The weapon was simple enough that ordinary infantrymen could master it quickly, reliable enough to function in the harsh conditions of jungle warfare, powerful enough to affect almost any tactical situation, and light enough that every infantry company could carry multiple units without significantly impacting mobility. Japanese forces possessed specialized weapons for various tactical situations, but these weapons were generally assigned to dedicated units, required extensive training, and lacked the bazooka's universal applicability. Colonel Hideki Takahashi commanded a regiment on Luzon in early 1945, and his tactical assessments reveal the cumulative effect of the bazooka on Japanese defensive doctrine. In a report to division headquarters dated February 3, 1945, Colonel Takahashi wrote with unusual candor about the challenges his regiment faced. The American bazooka has fundamentally altered the tactical relationship between attacker and defender. Previously, a well-prepared defensive position provided significant advantages. Defenders could use terrain and fortifications to multiply their effectiveness against numerically superior attacking forces. The attacker needed overwhelming firepower superiority or unacceptable casualties to reduce prepared defenses. The bazooka has inverted this calculation. Now, attacking American infantry possesses immediate, portable firepower that can reduce our strongest positions. Meanwhile, defenders gain little benefit from the bazooka since its primary targets, armored vehicles and fortifications, are assets possessed by the attacker, not the defender. Colonel Takahashi's analysis continued with a stark conclusion. We are fighting with a doctrine designed for offensive warfare while conducting defensive operations. Our weapons, our training, our tactical principles all presume we will attack while the enemy defends. Now we defend while the enemy attacks, and we lack the weapons to do so effectively. The Americans advance with portable artillery in the form of bazookas, rendering our fortifications merely temporary obstacles rather than decisive defensive positions. Unless we can somehow obtain similar weapons or develop effective countermeasures, our defensive battles will continue to be grinding retreats punctuated by Pyrrhic stands that delay but cannot stop American advance. The industrial dimension of the bazooka's impact proved equally demoralizing to Japanese observers who understood the broader strategic picture. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Hayashi, a logistics officer responsible for tank and armored vehicle production estimates, compiled a sobering analysis in March 1945 that circulated among senior staff officers. His report compared American bazooka production with Japanese tank manufacturing capacity. The numbers told a disastrous story. American industry produced approximately 15,000 bazookas monthly by late 1944, along with millions of rockets. Each bazooka cost roughly $150 and required minimal strategic materials. A single American factory could produce more bazookas in 1 month than Japan produced tanks in an entire year. Lieutenant Commander Hayashi's report included a particularly stark comparison. Consider the resource allocation. Japan requires 6 months and extensive industrial resources to produce a single Type 97 Chiba medial tank. This tank costs approximately 250,000 yen, requires 15 tons of steel, demands precision manufacturing, and needs a trained crew of 4 men. The Americans can equip an entire infantry company with bazookas for less cost than we spend on a single tank. Each bazooka operator needs perhaps 2 days of training compared to months of training for tank crews. Most critically, in any engagement between our tank and their bazooka-equipped infantry, the advantage lies decisively with the infantry. We are investing enormous resources in weapons that are effectively obsolete before they leave the factory. This mathematical reality extended beyond production numbers to operational sustainability. Private Ichiro Suzuki, serving with a supply unit on Leyte, recorded his growing despair in letters home that were intercepted and never delivered. His observations from November 1944 provide ground-level perspective on the logistical nightmare facing Japanese forces. Today, we received our monthly ammunition resupply. The entire shipment for our regiment could fit in 2 trucks. I watched American supply convoys yesterday, stretching for miles, carrying more munitions than our entire division will receive this year. Their bazooka rockets arrive in crates stacked 10 high. Each crate contains a dozen rounds. They unload hundreds of crates daily. Meanwhile, we are instructed to conserve rifle ammunition, firing only when assured of hitting a target. How can we fight an enemy who possesses ammunition so plentiful they can afford to use rockets against individual foxholes? The sensory experience of facing bazooka fire created psychological trauma that extended far beyond rational calculation of odds or tactical disadvantages. Corporal Masao Endo survived 3 separate bazooka attacks during the fighting on Saipan, and his medical records from a field hospital in August 1944 document severe combat stress symptoms. The attending physician noted Corporal Endo's reactions to sudden noises, his inability to sleep without nightmares, and his persistent description of the sound preceding bazooka impact. Patient repeatedly describes a specific rushing sound followed by explosion. He becomes agitated when asked about his combat experiences, stating that once you hear that sound, you know death is coming and there is no time to react. Patient expresses belief that the weapon makes defense impossible, as it provides no warning and no opportunity for countermeasures. This sense of helplessness appears central to his psychological deterioration. Japanese attempts to develop countermeasures or equivalent weapons highlighted the growing technological and industrial gap between the two nations. Captain Ryuichi Nakamura, an ordnance officer assigned to weapons development at the Kokura Arsenal, spent 6 months in late 1944 attempting to create a Japanese bazooka equivalent. His project notes, recovered after the war, reveal the frustrations of trying to replicate American technology within Japan's constrained industrial capacity. The fundamental principles were well understood. Creating a functional prototype proved possible with available resources, but scaling to mass production encountered insurmountable obstacles. Captain Nakamura's notes from December 1944 detail the specific challenges. We have successfully created 3 functioning prototypes of our Type 4 rocket launcher, essentially a copy of the American bazooka with minor modifications. Initial testing shows performance comparable to the American weapon. However, moving to production reveals critical problems. The rockets require precise tolerances in manufacturing to ensure reliable ignition and stable flight. Our current industrial capacity, strained by priority demands for aircraft and naval munitions, cannot meet these tolerances consistently. Furthermore, the propellant chemistry, while theoretically simple, requires materials now in critically short supply. Most significantly, even if we could overcome these technical obstacles, our production capacity would yield perhaps 200 launchers monthly, insufficient to meaningfully affect tactical situations across our extended defensive perimeter. The psychological impact of this failure reverberated through Japanese technical circles. Officers and engineers who had believed Japanese technical prowess could match or exceed American capabilities now confronted evidence of systemic industrial inadequacy. Major Kenji Yamamoto, who served as a technical liaison between the Ordnance Bureau and field commands, wrote candidly in his personal diary about this disillusionment. We have spent years telling ourselves that American material superiority reflects only greater resources, not superior capability. The bazooka reveals this comfortable lie. They have created a weapon that is simultaneously simple and sophisticated, cheap and effective, easy to manufacture yet difficult to counter. This combination represents genuine engineering excellence, not merely resource abundance. Any nation with basic industrial capacity could theoretically produce such weapons. That we cannot reveals not resource limitations, but systemic inadequacies in our technical and industrial organization. Japanese infantry increasingly expressed fatalistic attitudes as bazooka encounters accumulated through 1944 and into 1945. Lieutenant Takeshi Kobayashi, commanding an infantry company on Iwo Jima, recorded his observations in February 1945 as American forces began their assault on that strategic island. My men have faced artillery, naval gunfire, aerial bombardment, and flamethrowers. These weapons, while terrible, follow comprehensible patterns. Artillery requires observation and calculation. Naval guns fire from visible ships. Aircraft can be heard approaching. Flamethrowers have limited range. But the bazooka appears suddenly, strikes without warning, and can emerge from any position where a single man can conceal himself. There is no practical defense. My men have begun to view death from bazooka fire as both inevitable and arbitrary, a combination that destroys morale more effectively than any amount of enemy fire. The arbitrary nature of bazooka casualties particularly undermined Japanese military cultures emphasizing meaning in death through service to the emperor. Soldiers could accept dying in bayonet charges or defending vital positions, deaths that fit within established narratives of sacrifice and honor. But being killed by a rocket fired from an invisible position by an unseen enemy, often while performing routine activities behind what should have been safe lines, created deaths that seemed meaningless and random. This psychological erosion manifested in declining combat effectiveness, even among veteran units that had previously maintained cohesion under extreme conditions. Sergeant Major Hiroshi Taniguchi, a career soldier with 15 years of service, described this morale crisis in a report to his battalion commander on Luzon in January 1945. The newer conscripts expected war to be terrible, so the bazooka is merely one more terror among many. But the veterans, men who have survived multiple campaigns, find their experience provides no protection against this weapon. In previous battles, veteran soldiers could use their knowledge to improve survival odds. They knew where to position themselves, how to read terrain, when to advance or take cover. Against the bazooka, experience means nothing. A soldier who has survived 3 years of combat can be killed as easily as a raw recruit. This randomness undermines the fundamental belief that skill and experience matter, a belief essential to maintaining fighting spirit among professional soldiers. Japanese tank crews developed increasingly desperate tactics attempting to counter the bazooka threat. Lieutenant Yasuo Kimura, commanding a platoon of Type 97 Chiba tanks on Okinawa, described in his action report from April 1945 the elaborate procedures his crews adopted. We now advance only with extensive infantry screening, keeping foot soldiers at least 50 meters ahead of tanks to suppress or identify bazooka positions before they can fire. We avoid any terrain where visibility is limited, even if this means abandoning tactically advantageous routes. We position observers to watch for the telltale smoke trail of bazooka rockets. We maintain maximum spacing between tanks to prevent multiple casualties from single positions. We request smoke screens before any movement. We retreat immediately upon taking bazooka fire rather than attempting to suppress the shooter. These measures reduce our offensive capability by approximately 70%. We have become so focused on surviving bazooka attacks that we can barely accomplish our primary mission of providing mobile fire support to infantry. The cumulative effect of these defensive measures essentially negated the tactical value of Japanese armor. Tanks advancing at walking speed with infantry screens, avoiding favorable terrain, and retreating at first contact provided minimal combat power while consuming vast resources in fuel, ammunition, and maintenance. American forces quickly recognized this psychological advantage and deliberately staged bazooka demonstrations within view of Japanese positions, firing rounds at abandoned vehicles or structures to advertise the weapon's presence and capability. These psychological operations proved remarkably effective at further degrading Japanese armored morale. Major Toshiro Watanabe, an intelligence officer analyzing captured American documents in March 1945, discovered references to deliberate bazooka-based psychological warfare tactics. His report to headquarters included translated excerpts from American tactical manuals. The Americans explicitly instruct their forces to display bazookas prominently, to fire demonstration rounds where enemy forces can observe, and to distribute photos and leaflets showing bazooka effects on Japanese armor. They understand that the weapon's psychological impact exceeds its direct destructive effect. By ensuring Japanese forces know every American infantry unit possesses multiple bazookas, they create a persistent threat that influences enemy decision-making even when no bazookas are actually present. We are not merely fighting a weapon. We are fighting the specter of a weapon, an omnipresent threat that shapes our tactics even in its absence. The bazooka's impact extended to Japanese strategic planning at the highest levels. By early 1945, staff officers planning the defense of the home islands incorporated the assumption that any armored counterattack would face devastating bazooka fire. This assumption fundamentally shaped defensive doctrine, emphasizing static positions and infantry combat over mobile armored operations. General Yoshijiro Umezu, chief of the Army General Staff, addressed this issue in a planning conference in March 1945, as recorded in classified minutes later discovered by occupation forces. We must accept that our armored forces cannot operate effectively in the presence of enemy bazooka-equipped infantry. Therefore, our remaining tanks will be emplaced in fixed positions as armored pillboxes rather than held as mobile reserves. This represents a complete reversal of armored doctrine, but we are left with no viable alternative. The Americans have created a weapon that makes traditional armored warfare suicidal for the attacker. Japanese civilians gradually became aware of the bazooka through soldier letters, returnee accounts, and rumor networks that circumvented official censorship. Michiko Yamada, working in a Tokyo munitions factory in early 1945, recorded in her diary the growing awareness among workers that Japanese forces faced weapons they could not match. Today, a supervisor mentioned the American portable rocket launcher that can destroy our tanks. He spoke of it matter-of-factly, as if everyone knew, though I had heard no official announcements. During lunch, several women whose husbands or sons serve in the Army spoke of letters describing this weapon. One woman's brother wrote that Japanese tanks now burn as easily as paper lanterns. The government tells us our forces are inflicting terrible casualties on the enemy, but these private accounts suggest our soldiers face weapons we cannot counter. The gap between official pronouncements and private knowledge grows wider each day. This awareness contributed to the broader civilian recognition that Japan faced industrial and technological disadvantages that spirit and determination could not overcome. The bazooka became a symbol, a tangible example of American material superiority that could not be dismissed as propaganda or explained away by theories about Japanese tactical excellence. A single weapon, simple enough for any infantryman to carry and use, yet devastating enough to negate Japan's carefully husbanded armor forces. The symbolic power of this fact eroded civilian morale perhaps as effectively as it undermined military confidence. Japanese prisoners of war, when questioned by American intelligence officers, frequently mentioned the bazooka as representing a turning point in their psychological journey from confidence to despair. Sergeant Kenji Watanabe, captured on Peleliu in October 1944, told his interrogators that seeing a bazooka destroy a supposedly impregnable bunker convinced him Japan could not win. We had been told American infantry were poorly trained and relied on firepower to compensate for lack of skill. But giving such a weapon to common soldiers requires tremendous confidence in their training and discipline. A poorly trained soldier might fire carelessly, wasting expensive rockets. The Americans give these weapons to ordinary infantrymen and trust them to use them effectively. This speaks to a level of training and trust in lower ranks that we never achieved. More than the weapon itself, this decentralization of firepower revealed a fundamental difference in how our militaries functioned. The technical specifications of the bazooka, once Japanese forces managed to examine captured examples in detail, revealed design philosophies that contrasted sharply with Japanese weapons development. The weapon prioritized simplicity and reliability over precision and elegance. Parts were designed for rapid manufacturing with loose tolerances that accepted minor variations without affecting functionality. The sighting system was crude but adequate for typical engagement ranges. The electrical firing mechanism used ordinary batteries that required no special storage conditions. Every design choice reflected the assumption that the weapon would be used by minimally trained soldiers under harsh field conditions and needed to function reliably despite rough handling, inadequate maintenance, and exposure to mud, moisture, and corrosion. Captain Saburo Hayashi, examining a captured bazooka in April 1945, wrote detailed notes contrasting American and Japanese design approaches. Japanese weapons development emphasizes precision and craft. We create weapons that function beautifully when properly maintained by skilled operators. The Americans create weapons that function adequately when neglected by careless operators. In peacetime, our approach produces superior weapons. In prolonged war, their approach proves overwhelmingly practical. This bazooka will function after being dropped in mud, left in rain, handled roughly by exhausted soldiers. A comparable Japanese weapon would require careful maintenance and skilled operation. They have designed for the reality of combat rather than the theory of combat. This philosophical difference explains much about why we are losing this war. The economic implications of the bazooka extended beyond production costs to battlefield economics. Each successful bazooka shot that destroyed a Japanese tank represented a massive disparity in value exchange. The tank cost hundreds of thousands of yen, required months to build, needed a trained crew of 4 men, consumed scarce fuel, and represented a significant fraction of Japan's total armored strength. The rocket that destroyed it cost perhaps $20, could be manufactured in minutes, required no special operator training, and represented a trivial fraction of American munitions production. This economic imbalance meant that even highly successful Japanese tank operations, if they resulted in vehicle losses to bazooka fire, produced net negative value for Japan, while imposing minimal costs on America. Lieutenant Commander Masato Fujita, analyzing combat loss reports at Navy General Staff Headquarters in May 1945, calculated these exchange ratios with grim precision. His analysis showed that in battles where bazookas were present, Japanese forces lost armored vehicles at a rate that would exhaust remaining tank strength within 3 months of sustained combat. Meanwhile, American bazooka and rocket production exceeded consumption by wide margins, allowing continuous stockpiling of munitions. We face an opponent who can afford to expend 10 rockets to destroy one of our tanks and consider this an excellent exchange ratio. From their perspective, it is an excellent exchange. They value the life of the tank crew more than the cost of the munitions used to protect them. We calculate differently, but our calculations matter little when we simply lack the industrial capacity to sustain current loss rates. The bazooka also highlighted Japanese failures in combined arms coordination and tactical integration. American forces seamlessly integrated bazooka teams into infantry operations, providing immediate fire support without complex coordination or command delays. Japanese forces, by contrast, maintained rigid separation between infantry and supporting arms, requiring elaborate communication and approval procedures before specialized weapons could be employed. This organizational difference meant American infantry could respond to tactical developments in seconds, while Japanese forces required minutes or hours to coordinate equivalent responses. Private First Class Kenji Yamamoto, serving as a runner between infantry and support units on Luzon, described in a letter home his frustration with Japanese command procedures. Yesterday, our company encountered American positions we could not advance against. The company commander requested artillery support. This request traveled through 3 command levels before being approved and transmitted to artillery units. By the time shells began falling, 3 hours had passed and the Americans had reinforced their positions. I watched American infantry face similar situations. Their soldiers simply called forward their bazooka teams, who fired within minutes of the need being identified. This speed of response makes their infantry far more capable than their equipment alone would suggest. They have created a system where firepower is always immediately available, while we have created a system where firepower is carefully controlled but often too slow to be useful. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.